Scott just made the point. Jeff Jefferson seems to be a lot more secure, not just.
My dear guests, I'm Mr. Rock, your host. Welcome to Fantasy Island, a world of dreams, a land of make-believe, a place where nothing matters because everything is pretend. Well, what mystical fairyland could I possibly mean? Oh, yeah, just American foreign policy, which has about as much connection to reality as Ricardo Montalban has to do with quality Saturday night TV programming. I'm Steve Green, not Mr. Rourke. This is Trifecta, and here today to join us on our trip through Barack Obama's looking glass, Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. Smiles, everyone, smiles. Gentlemen, three stories that caught my eye over the last couple of days, which forced me to conclude that America's foreign policy is based on the same hard-headed realism as my 5-year-old son's Christmas list. The first story, it comes from Ukraine, where Obama has sent $250 million in non-lethal military aid. There's just one problem. Our non-lethal aid might just be lethal to the people we're trying to help. Now, the first part of this Washington Post story says that we're sending Humvees that have been sitting in warehouses for the last 20 or 30 years. 3 of the Humvees had plastic doors and windows, barely any protection at all. The tires on one of the trucks blew apart after driving only a few hundred kilometers, the result of sitting in a warehouse too long. Another infantry unit of approximately 120 men received from the Pentagon a single bulletproof vest, a type that U.S. troops stopped using in combat during the mid-2000s. If the Americans are going to send us equipment, don't send us secondhand stuff, said one Ukrainian Special Forces commander who requested anonymity to speak critically about the condition of his unit's gear. The decaying state of U.S. supplied equipment on Ukraine's front lines has bred distrust and lowered morale among Ukrainian troops. One Ukrainian Special Forces soldier felt he had to remind people, despite what people think, this is still a war. Bill, what kind of fantasy island do you have to live on to believe we're actually helping Ukraine like the president promised we would?
This is not a fantasy. It's not an accident. It's not. It's intentional, Steve. You know, Barack Obama is sympathetic. Barack Obama will not be the president who goes to war against Islam. I'm making a case here. And so basically our response to ISIS is, how little can this president do against ISIS and still remain in office? That's basically, if you look at how we're attacking ISIS, that's basically what we're doing. How little can we do without him being pulled out of office? We're going to bomb a convoy of ISIS trucks and we're going to give him 45 minutes of warning. You know, 75% of the total airstrikes vetoed by the White House. So he's not fighting ISIS because he doesn't want to fight ISIS. And likewise, he is terrified of Vladimir Putin. There's all those great memes going around. My favorite one is the one of little baby Obama sitting on his lap, feeling Vladimir Putin's big bicep, you know. But he's afraid of Vladimir Putin, and he's right to be afraid of Vladimir Putin, because the only person who could really put a little fear back into Vladimir Putin is somebody who had a little bit of a backbone, and Obama doesn't have one. So all of this makes perfect sense, Steve. We are aiding the Ukraine, but we're aiding the Ukraine for the face value of it, for the publicity value of it. We're not really aiding the Ukraine. We're actually harming the Ukraine. If we really wanted to aid the Ukraine, we'd be sending them Stinger missiles, and we'd be sending them Javelin missiles and anti-armor. And if we actually took it very seriously, then we would basically do what I would have done if I was president, which is say, Vlad, you seem like a nice enough guy. Your tanks are in Ukrainian territory. You have 48 hours to get them out. If one of them is 1 meter on the side of the Ukrainian territory by this time, 48 hours from now, then they're going to disappear. And we're not going to send in troops. They're just going to go away. That's how we deal with aggression in the West. And it's about time you figured that out. So, yeah, of course we send them crap gear. And by the way, this creates another kind of a problem, because if the Russians perceive through the Ukrainians that American equipment is crap, it emboldens the Russians even more. Imagine my surprise.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up Syria, because the next story involves Syria and comes to us from Britain's Independent paper. The French president and his ambassador, Sylvie Berman, ambassador to Great Britain, are lobbying hard to get Britain involved in France's tough new air campaign against the Islamic State. Asked how important it is that Britain joins the coalition of countries carrying out airstrikes against ISIS targets in northern Syria, Ms. Berman told the Today program, "It is absolutely essential. It's very important. We have always fought side by side, and of course, the UK has important capabilities. I think we received a lot of solidarity, support from the UK, so it would be strange now not to participate in the fight, because, in fact, those peoples are planning attacks in France, in Belgium, but probably also in London." Well, folks, it would be strange if the UK didn't join us, but Barack Obama hasn't even asked. And on Tuesday, the German cabinet approved sending 1,200 troops to fight ISIS, also at the request of France. Scott, I swear to you, I haven't been drinking today, at least not yet, but are we really living in a world where leadership in the Middle East, in Europe in the Middle East, which has been the job of America's diplomats and sometimes our military for over 40 years, that leadership has devolved to France? I'm having an acid flashback. What's going on here?
Well, apparently there are enough people in France who still remember stories from their parents and grandparents about what it's like when you're completely overrun by an enemy. And I think that they don't want to go back there. I think that they know that they live in a land that is strewn with skeletons and ordnance. And they know what can happen to a country that fails to prepare. And so finally, at least, François Hollande, the socialist president of France, has awakened and said, you know what? I walked over to the Bataclan and saw the carnage. I know what this looks like. I know what our future is if we don't stand up and do something. Now, that kind of hell rained down on us from on high in New York City not so many years ago, but apparently we have forgotten. I mean, there's a country western song called Have You Forgotten? And the answer is yes. As for all intents and purposes in Washington, D.C., they have forgotten what it looks like when terror strikes out of a clear blue sky on a Tuesday morning and hell rains down on business people and secretaries. And so I think I'm excited, actually, that François Hollande seems to be awakening. I don't hold out, I think Bill's right, I don't hold out any hope that the President of the United States, as he is currently denominated, will do anything beyond the bare minimum. When you're talking about that stuff in Ukraine, what that makes you realize is how important it is. Only a small fraction of people fight on the front lines in any war. It's the crew chiefs and the repair guys who keep gear working that has been around way too long, even for our own troops, that are crucial. The Ukrainians don't have that, and they probably don't have the savvy to use our newest equipment either. They couldn't keep, use, and maintain that either. There is a no-win situation here when you have such a feckless president as we do.
Can I just add one thing, just for scale?
Yeah.
I just think people should realize this. When they're talking about requiring help from Great Britain, I mean, no disrespect to our British allies. They fought with us everywhere with incredible bravery. They're top-line troops. They're just fantastic. But I just want to just give people some sense of perspective of the amount of scale here. When the French launched those raids on ISIS, they were talking about 20 jets, a sortie of 20 jets. The most powerful Air Force in the world is the United States Air Force. The second most powerful Air Force in the world is the United States Navy. The third most powerful Air Force is the United States Marine Aviation. Those are the three big hitters. None of them are in this game. None of them.
Sad. And something Scott said reminded me, every once in a while, it's not uncommon at all, you'll read a story in the paper, if you know where to look, about some farmer in northern France uncovering an artillery shell or even a mustard gas shell from the First World War that ended almost 100 years ago. And the Europeans still have disposal teams trained to deal with these things from the two world wars, the most recent of which ended 70 years ago. All right, there's another story. Obama is telling Turkey to secure its border with Syria while doing nothing to secure our border with Mexico, or even to perform any meaningful screening of Syrian refugees coming to this country. I don't think I've seen anything this surreal since Salvador Dali and Willy Wonka filled Rip Taylor's glitter bag for that flashback sequence on Twin Peaks. So, folks, just when you thought our foreign policy couldn't get any more surreal, well, it must have been when you turned off the news. While France is getting busy wrangling allies together and waging a real air campaign against ISIS, President Obama says the real way to fight the Islamic State is by taking a meeting. Now, I'm not making this up. In Paris on Monday for the UN Climate Change Conference, the president called that event an act of defiance against the caliphate. He went on, offering his condolences and pledging solidarity with the people of this beautiful city. He said, "We have come to Paris to show our resolve to protect our people and to uphold the enduring values that keep us strong and keep us free. We salute the people of Paris for insisting this crucial conference go on." Folks, whatever your views are on climate change, the idea that anyone so fundamentally and completely removed from reality that that person is going to save the planet, that is the fantasy island from which no one escapes. For PJTV, I am Mr. Rohr.